This month on In the Life.
How do you organize people who aren't visible to do something about their problems?
Pioneers in gay history.
Our very visibility is what freaks them out the most.
Larry Kramer and ACT UP.
Why ACT UP was so successful? Because everybody was terrified.
Families Matter.
They never knew that there was one other person in the whole world who had a gay parent.
And the film classic, Parting Glances. All this and more stories about the gay experience.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, and by the Arcus Foundation, and by the annual support of In the Life members like you.
Hello, I'm Michael Billy, and welcome to In the Life. If you look back in time, what seemed extraordinary in one age might seem common today. And today what some people call visionary, others may find long overdue. This month's show is about the extraordinary people and places that define history and chart the future of the gay community. In June of 1992, In the Life was first broadcast on public television, but it was back in 1983 that the first show, by and about gays and lesbians, was produced for local TV. It was called Our Time, and was created by the visionary writer and activist Vito Russo. Vito passed away in 1990. He is best remembered for co-founding the organization GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and for writing the book, The Celluloid Closet.
We never thought that when gay people came out of the closet that our problems were going to be solved. Our problems were just beginning because our very visibility is what freaks them out the most.
Vito Russo was a man who defied categorization. He was an author, AIDS activist, film critic, celebrity, hero, lover, and friend. He was a man who loved life passionately and was a shaper of the times in which he lived.
It's a sort of interesting time in history because on the one hand, people are learning more about lesbians and gay men than ever before in history because of this epidemic. And on the other hand, it's giving the right wing an excuse to attack us.
His groundbreaking lectures on the depiction of lesbians and gay men in film grew into his book, The Celluloid Closet, published in 1981. In it, he accused Hollywood of lying about our lives on screen. That was only one of the issues he addressed head-on when, in 1983, he wrote, produced, and co-hosted Our Time.
I'm Vito Russo, and you are watching Our Time, which is a brand new idea in television. This is a show by, for, and about lesbians and gay men. This is Vito Russo for Our Time in Cleveland, Ohio, where one of the most incredible ambassador of goodwill tours in America is taking place. Yes, it is. It's Mrs. Judith Beasley emerging from the limousine outside Keys Bar in Cleveland, Ohio, with a quiche in her hand, waving to the crowd, approaching the bar now, waving to the many fans waiting for her. Mrs. Beasley, can you tell me why you've come to Keys in Cleveland, Ohio tonight?
Well, as you may know, it's been publicized in quite a few of the papers across the country. I am on a goodwill tour as a goodwill ambassador on behalf of the League of Concerned Citizens from Calumet City, Illinois, which is my hometown, and I'm so proud of it. This particular evening, I'm here on behalf of the heterosexual community doing community outreach to the homosexual community, and I brought the quiche of peace, and I hope they'll accept it in the same spirit with which it's given.
Is quiche a very popular dish in Calumet City?
Well, it isn't. I'll tell you quite truthfully, a lot of us in Calumet City used to think that quiche actually caused homosexuality. Of course it doesn't. But Harold thought so too. It was years before I could get him to take a bite. You know, real men just don't eat quiche. I know they can't spell it.
This history-making show included segments with Lily Tomlin, Rita Mae Brown, and Brad Davis, and a backstage visit with Tony Award winner Harvey Fierstein before the premiere of his hit musical, La Cage aux Folles.
I think it's going to become the gay anthem. There's a song called I Am What I Am.
The community that Vito loved so much showed that they loved him in return by honoring him with award after award. He counted Lily Tomlin and Bette Midler among his friends, but he was something of a celebrity himself. When a young fan of his was told that Vito had just been seen with Elizabeth Taylor, he said, "No kidding, you know Vito Russo?" Vito, the author, the film historian, the teacher, the activist, and finally the person with AIDS, instilled passion, rage, and hope in all whose lives he touched. Vito was a model for what life out of the closet could become.
You know, I never cared about what people thought about me before there was such a thing as AIDS, and I don't care about it now. You know, I'm not on this earth so other people can approve of me. That's not my, you know, that's not why I'm here. You know, I'm here so that I can approve of myself.
The U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of assembly, but it wasn't until after World War II that gay men and lesbians began creating spaces to gather and to establish community. But the post-war world saw only a few exclusively gay groups forming, like the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. Decades later, after the Stonewall riots in June of 1969, literally thousands of organizations came into existence. This next story from 2003 looks at the history of gay spaces.
Gay Liberation Front was sort of, I guess, to be corny, it was the answer to a lot of people's prayers. I mean, it came out of nowhere, and it was gone before you really could say Gay Liberation Front. But what happened in that year and a half, changed so many lives. GLF was born, or no, literally, the first meeting, a group of people said, let's meet and see what we can do with the energy we have here from the riots.
Alternate University, a radical new school in Greenwich Village, offered unorthodox classes on everything from Marxism to karate. And on July 24th, less than a month after Stonewall, Alternate U became the birthplace of the GLF.
It became the place for their first dances, which was just unheard of, that you would publicize a homosexual dance.
But disagreements began on the very first night in the overcrowded room at Alternate U. Some women felt alienated and left to form radical lesbians. The trans community split off to found Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, and still others broke away and started the Gay Activist Alliance.
The founders of the Gay Activist Alliance, from their point of view, GLF was not sufficiently structured to get things done, and so they broke off and founded their own organization in December of 1969. They started talking really from the very beginning about needing to find some kind of alternative to the bars, which were seen as being syndicate-run, places that would encourage self-hate rather than an affirmation. So they managed to acquire an old firehouse on Worcester Street in Soho. And among other things, they started to dance every Saturday night. You would have maybe 1,000, almost all men, a few women, coming to dance at what was clearly a political organization. And indeed, there were times when they would hold demonstrations at 1 a.m. in the morning and literally take the entire dance to go harass the city council committee member who was giving us trouble.
Lesbian Feminist Liberation, LFL is what we called it, grew out of GLF, Gay Liberation Front, and GAA, Gay Activist Alliance, when the women felt that they needed to separate from the men. Lesbian women at that point really needed their own space. We met first at the firehouse and then moved from there to around Union Square and then eventually purchased one of the city buildings on 20th Street. And they were just social gathering places for women, and they were wonderful, and I miss that kind of space.
As black women, we didn't think our needs were being met. I'm not saying that they weren't doing the work, but they weren't doing the work. We needed something else. So, we got us a space, and we named ourselves Salsa Soul Sisters. We met at the Washington Square Methodist Church, and we met there for many years.
We would bring people together to have a space to talk and get to know each other. I mean, this was back then when there really were very few spaces that women could go to do anything.
In 1983, many of these divergent political and social groups came together when community leaders acquired an old schoolhouse.
Like 300 organizations existed. There was a lot of activity, but it had no locus. Everybody was spread out in whatever found places they could be. It was such a powerful idea to say, we now can have a piece of real estate that's gay and lesbian owned. It's ours, nobody can take it away from us, and we have control over it.
One of the functions of this center is to create a common ground for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and AIDS activists.
Many organizations have been born here. There are some that people know better than others. Probably the most dramatic story is the birth of ACT UP, which happened in 1987 when Larry Kramer came.
He described what he saw as the epidemic in our community and put forth a call to action. And ACT UP was founded on that Tuesday night.
There are still people who think that this is a white man's organization. When they come in the building, they must see us here. This is a support for all people.
Our history and our culture needs a place to be born and then a place to grow so that we can find out who we are, how it started, how it began, where we came from, where we're going. And that, I think, is it. More than the buildings, but you need the buildings to do it.
Audre Lorde was one of the most gifted writers of our time. She wrote numerous books of poetry and prose and co-founded Kitchen Table Press, the only publishing house for women of color.
I believe in poetry. I believe that all art makes us more powerfully who we wish to become.
Lorde passionately believed in the connection between art and politics.
Everything we do has got to contribute to the struggle because everything they do is grinding us into dust, and we will not be ground.
The issue of basic rights has made it out of the closet and firmly into the light of public debate. In this next story from 2004, we look at the history of the ongoing culture war over the lives of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans people. From the first sexologists who brought the issue of homosexuality into the realm of science, to the early gay pioneers, Barbara Giddings and Frank Kameny.
Technically, homosexuals didn't exist until the late 1800s. Though acts of same-sex love had been acknowledged and dubbed sins in the Western lexicon, the recognition of a gay identity didn't dawn until the earliest sexologists began publishing only 140 years ago. Starting in Germany in 1864 with Karl Ulrichs.
Before Karl Ulrichs, of course, homosexuality was against the law. Karl Ulrichs was arguing that those laws should not exist because it wasn't a matter of sin. It was rather because that person was born into the third sex.
However, the sexologists' perspectives on homosexuality varied wildly. But regardless of their perspective or terminology, the sexologists did agree that homosexuality was innate, and their work medicalized it, moving same-sex love from the arenas of sin and crime into the realm of science. And that budding science quickly became a battlefield.
Many homosexuals decided that this was certainly preferable to being called a sinner or a criminal. It's your fault if you're a sinner, but if you're born that way, you can't be accused of criminality or sin. It was the beginning of a kind of politicalization for sexual inverts. That is, they were a group and they could begin to demand their rights.
It was not long after that that the German doctor Magnus Hirschfeld founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, which was guided by the motto, "Through science to justice."
The early Sexologists believed that homosexuality was a matter of nature. Freud and the Freudians believed that homosexuality was a matter of nurture. He said that normal people develop heterosexual interests. People who become homosexuals are fixated in an earlier form of sexuality because of some trauma that has occurred.
But not everyone agreed. Unknown scientist Alfred Kinsey both expanded Freud's notion of innate bisexuality and challenged his concepts of fixed adult orientation.
We came up with this Kinsey scale that said that you didn't just have homosexuals and heterosexuals, but you had a broad range that went from Kinsey 0, pure heterosexuality, to Kinsey 6, pure homosexuality, with 5 gradations in between.
But Kinsey's work was largely ignored by the fledgling psychiatric establishment. And in 1952, homosexuality was classified a mental disorder in the American Psychiatric Association's inaugural Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM. In fact, even Freud's own writings couldn't dissuade the Freudians from taking the young science in a new direction. In fact, with the APA's new sickness branding, psychiatrists developed a whole range of new treatments for homosexuality.
A homosexual would be shown a picture of an attractive person of the same sex, and he or she would be given a shock, then shown a picture of an attractive person of the opposite sex, and there would be no shock.
And it got worse. From hormone injections and lobotomies to castrations, hysterectomies, and forced incarceration in mental institutions.
Really insane attempts to convert people to a different sexuality.
We saw ourselves as diminished creatures, but our only hope for any kind of happiness would be to present ourselves to a therapist and undergo prolonged treatment.
As a result, like countless others, Arthur Martin Duberman underwent nearly a decade of psychotherapy.
I definitely believe that if I stopped having sex, and if I went to therapy 5 times a week, and worked very hard at transformation, yes, I could become a practicing heterosexual. There are lots of scars from that kind of mistreatment, which is what we now know it was, that never go away.
But others refuse to be labeled sick.
How do you organize people who aren't visible to do something about their problems? And that was the main thing we had to work on at first. Then it became clear that we had to start going after the people in the mental health professions on the sickness issue.
In the early 60s, another pioneering voice joined activist Barbara Giddings in calling for change.
You had a whole establishment that had to be changed and reversed. And in order to get them to do that, you had to use political tactics.
Frank came along with a very a clear vision in his mind of what we needed to do.
A scientist by training, Frank Kameny scrutinized the studies that had been used to declare homosexuality a mental illness.
I found shabby, shoddy, slipshod, sleazy pseudoscience masquerading as science. Moral, cultural, theological, and social value judgments cloaked and camouflaged in the language of science without any of the factual basis for science.
They would say, you're sick, you don't deserve to have these rights, you're unstable. And we would say, no, we're not sick. We knew inside ourselves that we weren't sick. We would say that, and they'd say, that's your sickness talking.
Overcoming such dismissal would require a Herculean effort that mixed politics and science.
The science that homosexuality was not an illness was much better than the science that said it was. The Kinsey report, from a scientific perspective, was probably the most important first strike at the psychiatric theory of homosexuality as illness. The final nail in the coffin was Evelyn Hooker's study, which was published in 1957.
Straight psychiatrist Dr. Evelyn Hooker was the first to study homosexuality in the general population, as opposed to those in treatment or in prison.
She took the test results and she gave them to expert readers of projective tests, but she did not tell the readers of the tests who were the homosexual subjects and who were the heterosexual subjects. And the readers could not find any difference between the heterosexuals and homosexuals, which was really totally in opposition to everything that psychiatry in the 1950s was saying.
In the early 70s, gay rights activists began protesting the APA's annual conventions. The result? In 1971, the APA permitted Frank Kameny to organize a panel discussion on homosexuality.
This was the first time that the profession had ever admitted that there might be gays who were not in therapy and didn't have any need for it.
Meaning the 3 gay activist groups who stormed the panel.
The doors burst open, and all of these people came in, and the elderly psychiatrist proceeded to beat them over their heads with their gold medals and push them back out the door.
We took the microphone and took turns trying to say that this was not good science, this was prejudice, this was homophobia, and we weren't going to put up with it anymore.
And it worked. A panel discussion was planned for the APA's 72 convention, and it became a major turning point. 2 of the 4 panelists, Frank and Barbara.
Kay, my partner, said, you know, this isn't right. She said, you have 2 psychiatrists on one side and 2 gay people who aren't psychiatrists on the other side, and what you really need is someone who is both gay and a psychiatrist.
And they found exactly one who was willing to talk. Dr. H. Anonymous, who because of the stigma would not reveal his true identity as Dr. John Fryer until 22 years later.
And there he was with this fright mask and a fright wig and a voice-distorting microphone. He really rocked the audience, telling what it was like to be a closeted gay in a profession, to be unable to be honest with his own colleagues.
He had an enormous impact on the organization in terms of how they came to understand the implications of the diagnostic system that they were using.
The culminating moment would come in 1973 when the APA met to determine whether homosexuality should be removed from its diagnostic and statistical manual.
A very outspoken gay activist named Ron Gold gave a talk called, "Stop it, you're making me sick."
My illness, at least in part, was a direct result of the crimes perpetrated on me by a hostile society. You have been willing accomplices in such crimes.
Ron Gold delivered his speech to an audience of 3,000 psychiatrists, one of whom was Dr. Robert Spitzer, an APA member who then authored the resolution to remove homosexuality from the DSM.
And we went to his hotel room and we wrote this resolution, which turned out to be the thing that changed the world.
On December 15, 1973, the APA board accepted Spitzer's proposal and finally issued this statement: homosexuals should be given all protections now guaranteed other citizens.
This albatross that had been around our neck for decades and decades was finally lifted.
We were working for rights and for a full first-class citizenship in our society, and we were never going to get it as long as their ideas prevailed.
1973 was, I think, one of the most graphic examples of the way science gets caught up in political battles.
And those battles continue, as people with so-called gender identity disorder petition the APA to stop calling it an illness. While the diagnosis is necessary for some who need insurance to pay for sex reassignment surgery, others say it improperly categorizes them as sick.
At the moment, they're being intransigent, just as they were with homosexuality. The idea they know better than us. And we think this is a sign that they have a disorder called gender pathophilia, which is the need or desire to pathologize gender behavior that makes you feel uncomfortable.
Dr. Drescher says the APA is not considering removing GID as a diagnosis, but is looking at making the definition more specific. He also points out that psychiatry is a fluid science filled with individual human interpretation.
There was disagreement within the gay rights movement about this tactic of, bellying right up to the bar of the psychiatrist. Many gay people felt, oh, they won't listen to us. We don't have the credentials. We have to wait for the people with the appropriate training and expertise to do the studies that show that we are okay and normal, and then to get this information out to the unbelieving public and to persuade them to change their minds. And a lot of us in the movement said, no, we're tired of waiting. It will never happen if we wait for that, or it will be beyond our lifetimes. We want to do something now. We cannot wait.
Martina and tennis and women, it's a love match. Martina Navratilova, who came out publicly as early as 1981, is the greatest woman tennis player that ever lived, and a lesbian icon.
When I get all these accolades for everything that I have given, being true to myself, I say, who else would I be?
While winning more Wimbledon titles than any player in the world, she's also become an advocate for progressive causes, especially lesbian and gay rights.
Let's come out and dispel the rumors and lies that are being spread about us. Let's come out and set everybody straight, so to speak.
The last few stories looked at the struggles on the front lines of the gay movement. This next piece looks at a more subtle form of activism, the everyday. We'll meet out and proud families and learn about an organization that works to bring them together.
We have 6 children together, ages from 20 on down to 6. 4 of them are biologically mine, 2 are biologically Satara's. We brought everybody together, not to say that it hasn't had its ups and downs. It's the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, so how's your yearbook project going?
Pretty good. Well, I have 2 moms. It's a normal thing. I'm not eating with my hands, Mother.
Not really, so how are you?
I've been living with them for 10 years, it's like I'm kind of used to it.
I think the only time it becomes an issue is when it's someone else's problem.
Unfortunately, for the millions of kids growing up in the U.S. with a lesbian or gay parent, it is often someone else's problem.
My friends call my mom names, and I don't like it. Our friends still make fun of gay people. We don't feel comfortable telling them.
We just kind of combine our 2 moms into one, because sometimes we're talking about one mom, sometimes talking about another one.
Being a child of a gay or lesbian or bisexual transgender parent is very similar, I think, to growing up as a gay person, in that you unconsciously are learning all of these defenses and you don't even know it's happening. When you're walking with your 2 dads and you see kids from your school coming, you step away from them, wanting to just kind of edit your life a little bit or not be embarrassed.
There was this one girl in my elementary school that I had considered a friend. I told her that my parents were gay, and later on that week she said to me, my mom told me that if your parents are gay, then you're gonna be gay, and I don't want to be your friend anymore because of that. And I got really hurt by that.
To counteract the taunts, stigma, and isolation, 6 young adults with lesbian or gay parents came together in 1990 to form COLAGE, which is headquartered in San Francisco.
Our mission is to serve any daughter or son or person with a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning parent. COLAGE is here so that all of the children who are growing up can feel like they have a home of people who understand their experiences and share their experiences of their family background.
Well, COLAGE stands for Children of Lesbian and Gay Environments or something like that. I don't know what the E stands for.
We have 30 chapters around the country and about 30 prospective chapters in the pipeline. We have all kinds of stuff on our website and discussion groups and support groups and pen pal programs and newsletters led by young people for young people. We get between 5,000 and 10,000 calls and emails and letters every year. There are still people who call here all the time who are so glad to hear about us because they never, ever knew that there was one other person in the whole world who had a gay parent. They thought they were the only one. I mean, really, in 2001, that still happens. I grew up in San Francisco in the 70s with a gay dad and a lesbian mom. I can switch from potluck mode to drag queen mode in a heartbeat. It's really not a big difference to me.
We're just parenting a kid like hundreds of thousands of other parents across the country are just parenting their kids, you know? And when we go to COLAGE, that's what it feels like. It's just normal.
Of all the muck and discrimination and general ignorance and misinformation that's out there, you can sort of boil it down to about 3 points for kids who have queer parents. That our parents sexually abuse us, that because our parents are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, we will be as well, and that we will be socially stigmatized to a degree that we will not be able to function normally in society. All the social science studies that have been done on us to date show that we grow up to be fine. But I do believe that we are affected by homophobia. I do believe that having to grow up in a world that is unsupportive of our families and our culture and our lives hurts us. And I think that it would be really great if society was less homophobic so that we could blossom even more into the full potential of our own true selves.
When gay families are brought together, they often discover they have similar challenges and ways to support each other.
One of the things that was most fulfilling for me coming to COLAGE was meeting other people whose dads had either died from AIDS or who were HIV positive, because my dad is HIV positive, and it was something that I was, of course, in great pain around.
Brianna was adopted by my late partner, Kevin. She was just over a year old when Kevin and I met, and we started living together as a family. And then Kevin got very sick with HIV. Brianna was, you know, right by my side and Kevin's side throughout his whole disease process. Brianna was 5 when Kevin died. About a year after that, I met Greg. It's certainly colored that aspect of her childhood, but it also was an opportunity for her to experience the depth of love that she had for Kevin and his love for her, and how much incredible joy he received from her presence by his side. I mean, it was amazing to watch. And I know that that has enabled her to be as open and loving and trusting with people as she is.
When I came to COLAGE and I met other people who had been through it and who had survived it and who were able to support me and who showed me that I would be able to survive it as well, that was very, very meaningful for me. And that has been a gift that I have tried to pass on. When I ask a child, what have you learned from growing up in a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender home? What they say is, I have learned to be a stronger person from dealing with difference. I have learned to have a greater sense of empathy and a larger commitment to social justice for all people because of the discrimination that I have faced in my own life. They're growing up into these incredibly vibrant, fascinating, interesting, strong, compassionate people who are going off to their own schools and their own careers and starting their own families and spreading all of that change. I mean, I think it's incredible. And I think in 20 years or 40 years, we're going to see an America that's totally different because of that.
Larry Kramer continues to be one of the most outspoken and controversial figures in the gay movement. As the founder of ACT UP, he was a lightning rod for AIDS activism. As an author, his novels and plays captured the gay consciousness as it confronted the AIDS crisis. This next story was first broadcast in 2002. correspondent Ann Northrup profiles Larry Kramer's inspired life.
Faggots, act up. Gay men's health crisis, the normal heart. All controversial, all confrontational, all groundbreaking. But that's Larry Kramer. He pushes the envelope and pushes us higher and better. That's why I love Larry. That's why I've worked with him all these years. And now at age 67, Larry is continuing to break barriers, continuing to ruffle feathers. In December 2001, Larry became the oldest person living with HIV to have a successful liver transplant. So organ transplantation is his new crusade. And he's gone back to work on his major novel, The American People, that he's worked on for 2 decades. Tonight we hear from Larry himself, Kramer on Kramer, his legacy and his life.
I have a 45-year-old man's liver, and my surgeon, in all seriousness, says you are as old as your liver, so I am now 45 years old.
Not bad for a man who in summer 2001 was suffering from end-stage liver disease triggered by hepatitis B. After 7 long months on an organ donor waiting list, Larry got his new liver in December 2001. He knows he's one of the lucky ones.
I cannot tell you how many emails and calls I have had personally since the operation. How do I find a liver? How do I find a hospital? It's going to get worse and worse because as HIV infected and hepatitis B and hepatitis C infected people live longer and longer, there's going to be more of a demand for organ transplants. And we're just perched at this sort of this crucial moment on the seesaw here, and I'm afraid we're going to fall off unless we set up a system of, in your face like we did with ACT UP.
We must act up, fight back, fight AIDS.
ACT UP. To many, Larry Kramer was ACT UP. But long before AIDS, Larry was making waves with his written words.
Morning, Miss Brangwyn.
Morning. Yes, of course, there is that to consider.
His career took off early when he won an Oscar nomination for his screenplay adaptation of D.H. Lawrence's Women in Love. His first gay novel appeared in 1978. Its then shocking title and sharp-edged take on sexual promiscuity caused the gay literati to cringe. But Faggots became a bestseller and has never been out of print, and he soon began work on another book project.
It's called The American People. It's basically a history of America told through its diseases and its discriminations. And it's also a history of homosexuality in America. And I've been working on it since actually before AIDS came. And of course, AIDS usurped what the book was about.
For Larry Kramer, AIDS changed everything. In 1982, he helped start New York's gay men's health crisis. Of course, he then fought with the organization and left it. In 1983, he wrote a scathing call to arms in the New York Native newspaper, blaming the government and gay men for ignoring their responsibility to fight the oncoming plague. And he kept writing. His 1985 play, The Normal Heart, was a clarion call for action and abstinence.
Now it's a history play. People want to know what happened at the beginning to get us into this mess, and that's basically what Normal Heart is all about, the very first days of AIDS. In this country, anyway. It's being done all in the rest of the world in small countries, remote places I've never even heard of, where you never see the royalty checks from, but I don't care.
Now, Felix, you understand that your body no longer has any effective mechanism for fighting off anything.
Well, I'm gonna beat this thing, you know?
Good.
No.
That's the right attitude.
No, I mean, I'm gonna beat this. I've always been lucky.
Good.
I guess everyone says that, right? Well, I'm gonna be the one who beats it. I wanted my job at the Times and I got it. I wanted Ned and my God, have I given it to him?
I don't know.
Can he catch it from me now?
We just
Did he give it to me?
Act up, fight back,
Fight AIDS! Then, in March 1987, came ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. Its co-founder, chief cheerleader, and rabble-rouser was Larry Kramer.
Why ACT UP was so successful? Because everybody was terrified. Everybody was terrified of dying, which most of them did. And everybody was young and angry with a lot of energy, and that's why we were able to mobilize so many people. That's what ACT UP at its height was all about, fighting to save our own lives.
The temperature's rising, it's getting warm. The party's over, so we went to storm the NIH. It's just war, storm the NIH for the sick, storm the NIH for the poor, storm the NIH, storm the NIH, storm the NIH.
The backlash is not going to happen against the activists now. The backlash is going to happen against the system. People think all you had to do was go out there and scream and yell and you'd get your way and get your drugs. It wasn't that at all. ACT UP had a cadre of experts that we could send inside to the meetings. And once we got our seat at the table, we knew how to use it very well. And you know, we did. Those drugs are out there now because of ACT UP, solely because of ACT UP. And the drugs that are keeping everybody around the world who can afford them alive are there because of us. All illnesses have profited from the anger of ACT UP.
Today, many of those former activists are on the inside, working within the system. To Kramer, that's understandable, but it's not enough.
I don't see any gay activism, and I don't see any AIDS activism. And the organizations that represent us in Washington are pathetic. We have a paltry, maybe 5, 10 people in Washington fighting for us. So while we criticize HRC, and they're eminently criticizable, we can't really condemn them because they're not really getting our support. Until we are strong enough to have enough lobbyists in Congress, as the Jewish people do, as the Catholic Church does, as the automobile industry does, we are not going to have any rights. If every city with a gay population in this country had a fundraiser once a year and raised $200,000 to fund their own lobbyist in Washington, imagine how many lobbyists we would have. We would have a huge network of lobbyists, hundreds of them.
For his part, Larry Kramer can find solace knowing that his words still resonate. His follow-up to The Normal Heart, The Destiny of Me, opened in London in the summer of 2002.
It was just such an unbelievable treat for me to have this play, I don't know what to say, re-recognized. It got wonderful reviews in New York, but it was never done anywhere else in the world, and I've never been able to understand why. Every single actor in it was phenomenal, and in many instances much better than the ones we had here in New York. And the audience was just like this. You could have heard a pin drop the whole time.
And Larry continues to hammer away on The American People, the book he began more than 20 years ago.
I was terrified that I would be dead without finishing it. And now that I have been granted more life, that's number one on the agenda, to finish that book. I started out to be a writer and not an activist. And I want to be taken seriously as a writer. That's the thing I want to be remembered for when I die. That's what this attempt to write this gigantic novel is all about. I want to be remembered as a writer who was an activist, not an activist who was a writer.
The old ACT UP is no longer useful enough. There are not enough of us. Few people go to meetings. Our chapters have evaporated. Our voice has dimmed in its volume and its luster. Our protests are no longer heard. We must be heard. We must be. We should not accept crumbs. We must not accept crumbs.
In In 1977, after 4 tries, Harvey Milk became San Francisco's first openly gay supervisor. Known as the Mayor of Castro Street, Milk devoted his life to lesbian and gay rights and the rights of all minorities. He led the passage of a gay civil rights bill for San Francisco and was instrumental in the defeat of one of the first anti-gay initiatives. After only 11 months in office, he was assassinated by fellow supervisor Dan White. His early death was and still is a great loss.
In 1986, Parting Glances hit theaters. As one of the first films to address HIV and the complexities of gay relationships, it's a classic of queer cinema. But the original print of the film was in dire need of restoration. Now, more than 20 years later, the Outfest Legacy Project has preserved this important work. In October 2007, a newly restored Parting Glances had its New York premiere at Lincoln Center, bringing life to a pivotal period in gay history.
Parting Glances centers around Michael and Robert, a New York couple who are about to temporarily separate when Robert is transferred overseas. Michael's ex-lover and best friend is Nick, who is HIV positive.
Oh, not that. Believe it or not, I like this stupid thing.
I let them plan it.
The plot takes place within a 24-hour period and begins as Robert prepares to leave Michael and New York for a 2-year work assignment in Africa.
I want to leave. Look, I'm not going to last 2 years over there. I'll probably be back in 6 months. We just need a break, you know?
The centerpiece of the film, and its most memorable scene, is a going-away party for Robert, hosted by their close friend, Joan.
Let me just put on a light.
It was extremely important because men needed to know that there were other men out there leading lives like theirs, with friends and love and lovers and illness.
As an actor, this was a great love story. And this was a great story of, drama is based on conflict, and this film is about conflict from the very beginning, about old loves, about leading your life, about not being afraid, about challenging yourself and challenging convention and challenging ignorance.
My character is HIV, and at that point, I don't think there was any other films that were dealing with this. If you're trying to market a film, it's probably not the thing that people would flock to see.
There was a screening in New York, and we invited the audience to talk back afterwards. And I'll never forget, there was a woman who stood up and said, this film really disturbed me. And I'm like, okay, take a deep breath, talk to me. And she said, I have a brother who's homosexual. And I said, oh, my sister and you have something in common. And she said, what really upset me about the film is you made it look so normal. And I just said, thank you. And I said, you need to go home now and think about what you just said. Because, yeah, that's what it's about.
Writer-director Bill Sherwood's desire to make Parting Glances grew out of his frustration with the usual content and style of gay-themed films.
He had a way of capturing snippets of his life and writing them down and making you see so clearly what he had lived.
That time in 1985, 86, no one was talking about AIDS. And Bill Sherwood was really the first one with this cast in Parting Glances to discuss this. And it was labeled a very independent film at the time. It was one of the first, queer indies.
It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault.
No, it's not that. It's that sometimes when I'm over there, all I can think of is I'm so glad I don't have it.
Who wouldn't be? And don't worry, a few years down the road, we have lung cancer, heart attacks to look forward to.
It's different when you're 50 or 60. Impending death doesn't freak you out as much.
I bet it does. I bet it's a fucking drag, even if you're 80.
I think if Bill had lived, that he would have turned out movie after movie, and that just like in his real life, there would have been this incredible mishmash of characters that were gay and gay straight, and women who acted like men and men who danced like little girls. He had a very vivid imagination.
My pants don't hang down in the back.
Straight guys' pants always hang down in the back.
Michael, do my pants hang down in the back? Yep.
I ended up playing Joan in Parting Glances because I worked with Bill Sherwood as a secretary at one of the local television stations.
Bill actually saw me on stage, which was good for me because when I auditioned for the film, my audition was so terrible that he told me that he wouldn't have hired me unless he had seen me on stage.
Steve was not at all Bill's original conception of Nick. Nick was supposed to be 6'5" and strong and with bushy black hair, and instead we found Steve Buscemi, who was totally wonderful in the part.
Right. But you didn't think this kid from Bensonhurst had so much stashed away, did you? Ha ha ha.
He was concerned that I wouldn't take it because I was working on the fire department and I wouldn't want anybody to know I was playing this part. And I think that when I first read the script, there was an element within me that just thought, can I really play this part? But I think any actor who would have turned down playing that part because the character is gay would be insane.
Richard was fresh out of acting school, and Bill cast him in this role. It was a difficult role because it was Bill. And he was very much a control freak.
We would shoot a scene and he'd say, now on this line, you should say it more this way, but then on this line, you could be a little bit, and he'd go through every line. And then we'd do the scene, and the scene would end, and he'd say, gee, Steve, can't you have any spontaneity?
He's mad? Good. Hey, you think I should go beat up Robert?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. You don't believe me, do you?
I'm gonna call a guard and I'm gonna book it right now.
You better call an ambulance, too.
Parting Glances opened doors for several of its cast members. For Kathy Kinney and Steve Buscemi, it became their ticket to Hollywood.
Listen, we had more fun in one weekend than the entire state of New Jersey's had since the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
That's not saying much.
Actor-director Steve Buscemi has gone on to star in such films as Reservoir Dogs, Fargo, and most recently, 28 Days. While Kathy Kinney has reached cult status as Mimi on the television hit The Drew Carey Show.
Go for it. Have a little adventure yourself.
When I came out here to Los Angeles, everyone was like, oh, we saw you in Parting Glances. What a wonderful movie. You were so wonderful. You know, let me see if I can help you.
The day the film was released, I got a call from an agent at ICM. So that's what really got me started in getting film work.
I do know I got a part on a series in Los Angeles because of Parting Glances. The director had seen Parting Glances and said that I was good and wanted me in it.
You're leaving because you don't want to be around when Nick dies. You don't want to deal with me going through that.
I think Parting Glances holds up very well. I think it's kind of the grandfather of a lot of contemporary gay films.
We're a community that has so few actual monuments to our history, so little, public, visible, mainstream acknowledgement of who we are and the impact that we've had on this planet. And the Legacy Project, the collection at UCLA, preserving films like Parting Glances, so many films and moving images that made so many of us who we are. That work is building a moving, dynamic monument to this community and the history that has been told by the brave visionary artists who have been chronicling our lives for the past 30 years on film.
Parting Glances is still important because it gives you permission to just live your life.
I think many people in the mainstream think that if they just keep trying to squelch us long enough, we will finally disappear and go away. Well, I can assure them we are not going to disappear. We will not go away. This is very frustrating for our opponents because they squelch us here and we just pop up somewhere else. We'll keep on doing that until we've achieved full equality, and then we can be on our own.
Thank you for watching In the Life. To sign up for monthly air date alerts or to download past episodes 24/7, please go to our website at inthelifetv.org or call 1-800-627-ON-TV. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Michael Billy. Thanks for tuning in, and please join us next month.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, and by the Arcus Foundation, and by the annual support of In the Life members like you.